This is My Best Campaign. I'm Amanda Lee Smith, the CEO of Monday Creative. In every episode of My Best Campaign, I get to dig in with CMOs, marketing VPs, and founders to talk about one career-defining campaign. And today is just a hoot. Shawna Olsten does not pull any punches as she tells us about the ups and downs of a star-studded launch of one of Aritzia's biggest product franchises, the Super Puff. You know this jacket because it is everywhere, in every color. And puffer jackets have been around for decades, but Aritzia somehow found a way to absolutely own this product and sort of make you think they invented it for the fashion set. And it all comes back to one infamous UGC campaign starring a lineup of A-listers with Kendall Jenner at the center. Today we'll hear the controversy over those shoes, get lessons on how to use influencers as talent, and get a solid grasp of Aritzia's winning retail playbook. This was such a fun and expansive conversation, and Shawna brings 2 decades of expertise from brands like Quiksilver, Kit and Ace, where we work together, Native Shoes, and her most recent role at SAXX Underwear. I really think you're going to like this one. I did not realize that you were employee number 3 at Native.
Yeah.
That's pretty unbelievable.
Yeah, it was me, the founder, his girlfriend, and his best friend.
What was that like?
So my first day was April 1st. I always like to tell people like that because I was like, it wasn't a joke. It was real. So that was like a very defining experience in my career because it's the one thing I can go back to and be like, literally, I was there at ground zero. Yeah. And I had come from a mega corporation at the time, which was like a $2 billion publicly traded company. But I was so excited about that product and the idea of something new in the footwear industry. Our office was upstairs of the old Mitchell Press building, which is now owned by Bocce, and they owned it at that time. So they had the very top level of it that could only be accessed by stairs or the freight elevator, and they wanted us to take the stairs, and it was on the floor, and there was no bathroom up there, and there was no heat up there, and there was some extension cords, and it was a very cool space. Like incredible view because you're right down there at the foot of Kitsilano. So you have like North Shore Mountains, Kits, UBC, everything, the ocean, like $1 billion view now, I guess. But it was like literally just me and everybody was in China figuring out how to make shoes because we hadn't even shipped shoes yet.
So you're all alone in this freezing cold office?
Yeah. I remember it was like windy that day and the windows wouldn't stay closed and there was like everything was papers scattering everywhere. I was like, what have I done?
What was your role?
I came on as the marketing director, but it was like very apparent, especially in the first year, that we were all doing everything. Like I was calling out COD orders that month because everybody's like, what does COD even mean?
But you, like Native Shoes went global within about a year and a half or a year, right?
Yeah, we were in 35 countries, I think the final count was, right away. And I think that's just like, if I give like the ultimate credit of that is like a new exciting product. And, you know, a product that was using a material that now is very common in footwear was only really being used by Crocs. At the time. And
Crocs didn't have street cred.
Yeah, there was not yet, but like good for them. They do now. What if we took like, you know, the best sort of like silhouettes, they've already been done in footwear. Like they're there, they're classic and they've stood the truth of time and reimagined them in new materials. And so that's kind of what was the founding vision of Native. And then the thing that we quickly realized was that, you know, people were looking at it like they literally would just call it cool Crocs. And as a brand person, it was like, I would like die on the tree, not calling it cool Crocs, even though that was the quickest way in. And so finding new ways for people to think of that brand differently was really exciting. And I think probably the most successful way that we did that with some of our early partnerships with Mad Decent, with some of the artists we worked with out of Miami, Friends With You. And then we were able to attract collaborations like Marc Jacobs, which then kind of just set it off to like, yeah, I mean, if he worked with you, then everybody was going to work with you. And I talk to people about that frequently. I was like, who's the influence on all the other influencers or people that you want to work with, you know?
Yeah.
And one of the key things I think I learned in that moment is like, if you have the right unlock early on, then everything kind of just starts to fall into place. And like that literally came around because I had a friend who was interning there, who I sent shoes to, who wore them to work, and it was like, this sounds like all by mistake. This is very calculated on my behalf, but it worked.
Yeah. This is actually
Sometimes
the
it
thing.
does work.
This is the thing I remember about working with you, because full disclosure, we worked together at Kitten Ace back in the day, is you were so on top of gifting. You were also the recipient of gifting. I always remember great packages coming to the office from Sage, from all the local brands where you had relationships.
Everybody loves free stuff.
You were really good about strategic gifting, and it feels like that's probably been a thread throughout your professional history.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's difficult to scale that, like, and I don't think the result of just gifting alone, but having the right network and having the right network that's familiar, comfortable, and loves your product matters when you need that. And maybe, I think we just put it together, that was sort of the beginning of those collaborations at Native Shoes, which positioned us as a fashion brand, not just cool Crocs.
Yeah. I had the Air Max version of Natives, which they weren't like offered for that long, but I really loved them.
Which one? Did you have the?
I can't remember what they were called, but they had like an Air Max silhouette.
Oh, I can't remember what they're called either.
Anyway.
Oh wow, that was a long time ago.
Well, okay, that's such a great way to set things up, because that was a really key transition moment in your career. You came up through DC Shoes and Quicksilver, Native, Kitten Ace, Aritzia, and today SAXX.
Yeah.
Just dive right in. What advice would you give to someone that wants to crack into the industry and follow a path? Because you really forged that from nothing.
So if I go back right to the beginning, I knew that I wanted to be in marketing like when I was 18. I knew. Wow. There was a series of videos that had come out, and they've recently resurfaced actually, because they've been brought up as a trigger point for the start of content marketing, and specifically long form content marketing. And they were the short films that Guy Ritchie produced for BMW. And I remember seeing those as a teenager and asking my parents, like, who gets to do that? And they're like, the cinematographer. I was like, no, but like, who gets to come up with the idea? And they were like, I guess the marketing person.
I guess Madonna's husband.
Yeah, casual. But they, like, if you have read up on those, like, they premiered those at the Cannes Film Festival. That's how they released them. And they starred Clive Owen, who was kind of virtually unknown at the time. So I like look back at that moment and I think that was it. That's what I was going to do. So when I showed up to work for the distributor at the time for DC Shoes, I was the receptionist who was literally going to be the marketing director. And 9 years later I was. And so if I think through that and going back to the story about calling out COD orders, I had done that before. I knew what that meant because I literally had been my job at one point in my career.
It's like you had worked through every single stage.
Everything. I did everything but finance. I did inventory control. I did sales. I was selling skateboard wheels. Like, and I think sort of the breaking point for me was DC Shoes had decided to launch, well, there was a couple, but DC Shoes had decided to launch a women's brand. And so as the token woman in sales, it was like, oh, well, Shawna can do it. And I did the first season and it was very successful for us. And then I was sort of told, like, I was still keeping my foot in this marketing thing. And I was told, you need to make a decision. Are you going to be in marketing or are you going to be in sales? And if you go into sales, you're going to make $10,000 more a year.
Yeah.
But I was like,
sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice.
If you're in sales at a hot brand, but like, not everybody's in sales at a hot brand. So at the time I would have been, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And early, like halfway through my time there, we were acquired by Quicksilver, and we were the first sort of distributor to be acquired and the first office to set up like singular brand management. So we had one office managing all 3 brands. We brought all the sales agencies in-house. They loved that, of course. And we had a team that managed all 3 brands for Canada.
What was so Quicksilver, Roxy,
and DC?
And DC?
Yeah.
And were you kind of the de facto Canadian arm of Quicksilver then?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, eventually that's, I think, how they set up all of it, because they had these separate offices and then they collapsed everything. I can't tell you how it's set up now, but we were sort of the first trial run at that. And because of that moment and that ability to sort of grow within the business, I mean, I was there for over 9 years. And then I left and went to the Ground Zero Native Shoes, which is what I call character building.
And you did it basically again at Kit and Ace. Like we were a couple hundred people when you came to Kit and Ace, but the infrastructure wasn't really there. Not in the world that we were building. No,
it wasn't. And it's interesting for me to think about that, because I think we were trying to build it, but it kept changing. And so when I look at startups now, like in sort of those early cycles, you can spend so much time building process and perfect operations and, but like at the end of the day, all that stuff changes so frequently. It's actually just a waste of your time. Like, why don't we just build on things that are going to get our brand recognized and just invest in that and just have it kind of be a shit show for the first little bit. And that's the thing at Native Shoes that we did really well is, and that was really, I think my strength has always been activating creatives. And so I look back at Kit and Ace and I was like, sometimes we were just spending time not on activating the cool stuff, like trying to, have all this background stuff of documenting so that the next person coming in could do it. It was just going to change anyway.
That's so true. Yeah. I kind of almost had it the exact opposite. I said the infrastructure wasn't there. I would say like the brand wasn't there. All we had was infrastructure. We had so much infrastructure, but we weren't necessarily activating.
We have a lot of infrastructure because we were going to be this big, huge thing. And, I still look back on that brand and what the vision was for the product and who the customer was. And then I look at like Viore today and I just get so annoyed and just think that was ours.
Yeah. Yeah. We could have owned
that. That was literally ours. It was right there.
I like to think maybe they took our playbook.
Yeah.
The thing that I'm hearing is one of the things that it takes to build a career is like you knew how to do everything and you were willing to kind of get your hands dirty and you weren't too good to do every single step of getting things off the ground.
Yeah. And I mean, that I knew how to do everything is probably a stretch. I think the key thing is that I was willing to do anything. And there's not a lot to me, one of the things that's always seemed like the person who's just willing to do it knows how to do it. Like a lot of it is based in common sense. And obviously, I mean, there's some confidence, like there's moments there that were really scary, especially at Native Shoes. Like I was young enough, so I had no responsibility. I actually think I'm more of a risk taker today than I was then. But it was like, we just did what had to get done. And it definitely felt like, especially when you're, led by a creative and really empowered creative people at that business, which is what made it so magical. It's like, we are coming up with ideas and things that to me sound insane. Like we're never going to be able to pull that off, like building an inflatable village. But like, actually you can.
You can.
You can. Yeah. And it doesn't only need to be solved with money.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beautiful thing about having spent time in like an absolute startup is like everything's negotiable. And if people want to work with you, then everything is also within reach.
Yeah. I was listening to a Mr. Beast interview just yesterday, and one of his kind of maxims is that like impossible is possible.
Yeah, that's a great one.
You just haven't either like found the right, partner for it yet. You haven't paid enough. Like there's levers that you can pull to make these things possible.
Yeah.
And you just have to decide. You have to find the person that's willing to push to do it.
And there's lots of people out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It's
people,
okay.
especially in the early days, want to build their portfolio and stuff like that. And they want good partners that are engaged. And there's nothing like, being in a partnership with somebody that turns into something transactional and like the consumer can smell it. It's just not authentic.
For sure. Yeah. So you've been through startup, you've been through big brand, you've kind of bounced between all of these, and now you're probably somewhere in the middle at SAXX. It's not really startup anymore, but it's still small enough to probably feel scrappy. When you look at the range of places you've been and the range of people you've worked with, what do you think are the core attributes it takes to really make it in this industry and follow the path that you've gone on?
There's a certain amount of it is timing, to be honest. And like, if we go back to that example we just used with Kidneys and Fiore, like, how did they just take that away? And I think the thing with timing is the timing will always come. So it's just dependent on how much resilience do you have and how much patience do you have to wait to get there, and how much money burn rate do you have to get there. And so I look at, and maybe Native Shoes is an example of this, like brands that seemed like nothing was going to stop them. And it did, it just stopped working. And you can it's easier for me to look back and like, well, they didn't do this or they did that, or, it's very, you can try to see the missteps, but there's never just one thing, and it's never linear. And sometimes it's also just trend and consumer mindset and the diffusion of that over time. So if I think of the one thing that makes people successful is patience. And I think a brand like Aritzia is a perfect example. It's just like, it's 40 years. Is it 40 years? It must be. It's 40 years. Yeah. I think they're talking about it's 40 years of consistency in their product and their customer experience and the things that they have done to be dynamic in the products that they offer and how they appeal to their core customer and how they bring in a new customer and how they service her. And I just look at something like that. It was like, it's not like there wasn't hard times. I wasn't there for any of them, but you definitely heard about them. But when there was like any itch of, oh, we're going to be entering hard times, there was an action plan for that. And we're going to be resilient and we're going to survive. And we're going to go back to the things that we're really good at. And I think also you get to a certain size where it's like, you can't go away. Yeah. And I was talking to somebody about this recently. Like, it seems like it's really hard to grow past, let's say, $50 million. And then it's really hard to grow past like $150, $200 million. Like, to become that $1 billion brand, it's hard. And there's only space for so many. But if you look at the brands that have been there and you think about where they started, and I think we're seeing it maybe with Nike right now, like some of the missteps they're going to have along the way, nothing's actually ever going to take that away from them though. Like, the sheer
it feels like they plateaued. It's like still Nike.
Yeah. It's fine. Great career choice still.
Yeah. So, you talked about like, if you have the right amount of money and the burn rate, and Aritzia has had, fortunately for them, a pretty rich coffers to carry through rough times, but you highlighted some other things that they did really well. What do you think are the things about the brand that are just mainstays, like tried and true, and have allowed them to weather 40 years?
I think their obsession with their customer and just really knowing and understanding who she is, and like having a very leadership with a very, very strong merchant background who knows how to empower that, meaning there's always something for her. Yeah. At the right time. You know what I mean? And of course, like, there's always bets that get made that aren't the right ones, but when the early indicators were there for a product franchise and its success, it was enabled and the gold was going to be mined. Yeah. And that's something that they do really, really well. And I think outside of that, it's like, is it fast fashion? Yeah, sort of. Not as bad as that, but like somewhere mid luxury. We used to call it mid luxury. And so it's still a decent quality product. it's consistent in what it delivers, and the experience is consistent. And I think one of the things that they've consistently done really well is their store experiences. And I don't, that's not completely dead. Like stores still matter. There's reasons to be in those stores, and they have exceptional retail staff that are really incentivized to, sell their stuff. And so when you go in, you kind of know what you're going to get, and you get somebody that's extremely knowledgeable. And, for the most parts, the stores are really well put together, really thoughtful. There's always some surprise and delights, and details are considered. And I think, if you think of just the spirit of that existing in a retail store, like that spirit existed in everything that we did. And it came from the top, like it mattered. Quality mattered. And for the consumer, it's like they could consistently, rely on that. And it came down to, like, in everything that we did, it was the people, it was the content we produced, it was the store experience. It was just like everything, the shopping bag, like just like they just sort of get lived through in these little details that together become so important, and I think have longevity. And it's like showing respect for your customer, really. Like, Shoppers isn't the place to start cutting budget.
No.
Like it's like a free billboard.
Yeah. I feel like that's a lesson that we learned at Kit and Ace, that Chip brought over from Lululemon, because the shopper was always the advertising. We always knew you needed to have an iconic shopper, because you wanted everyone to be toting.
You wanted everybody bring their lunch in that thing to work.
Everyone still does. I still see Kit and Ace bags, and you absolutely see Lululemon bags. And to some extent, I think you probably see Aritzia bags if you want something you can throw in the recycling afterwards.
Yeah, they're
a lunch
beautiful
bag.
bags. Really nice artistic photography on. I think it was Jürgen Teller when I was there the last time. I don't know who it is now. They, like, it's just a detail that's thought through. And I feel like when I go into a retail store now, and that is not something that's considered, I'm not taking the bag. Or they're like, oh, we don't do bags? Like, what?
They're really missing an opportunity for cheap advertising.
Really? Are you sure? Or we want you to pay for this bag? Like, no.
Yeah. Yeah. The retail experience has almost become a cliche. In Vancouver, where we have so many Aritzias and TNAs, it's almost a joke how predictable the retail experience is. Like, you're going to have a salesperson, usually a saleswoman, who is incentivized. And so they're hyper motivated. They're going to tell you how good you look in things. You're going to have to come out of the fitting room to see what you're wearing. Like, it is, they know exactly what they're doing. They've perfected this experience, and you either love it or hate it, but you still put up with it because it's sort of this wonderful immersion experience when you walk in there, and you're going to find what you're looking for.
Yeah. And if you don't want that, you just buy the stuff online. Like, they have an amazing online experience now, and great customer support service, of course, just like they always have. And so, I mean, it works for them, and they've really honed that. And it's come from a deep respect of the talent and the people, because that's ultimately who's living that for them. And when you hear stories about, women that have worked there forever. I mean, I think the CEO, Jen Wong, what an inspiration. I think she's been there 36 years, 37.
And she started on the floor, right?
Started on the floor. And what a great example to show to your young store staff that are just starting. Like, maybe one day you can be the CEO. And, maybe women that went there in university because they wanted a discount, but they could make more money there than at a serving job. And then they were like, oh, I can actually make more money here than the thing I just got my degree in.
Yeah.
As they sort of move up the ranks and continue to share that experience and train staff to sort of what their secret sauce is. And it always surprises me when I go into a retail store and it doesn't seem like the staff are considered.
Yeah. It's part of the experience.
It's like one of the most important parts of the experience.
Yeah. So, you talked about things that Aritzia does really well. And one of the things that they are absolutely famous for is the franchises that they own. And while you were there, you were part of some big franchise launches. Denim Forum, I think one of the best denim brands that have come out in the last 10 years. A-OK Cafe, and probably the biggest one, and anyone that knows Aritzia knows the Super Puff franchise. And, puffers are not a new concept, but somehow Aritzia managed to make this franchise feel like it was this new thing and make it completely iconic. How did they do that? How did y'all do that?
I mean, I think like the very beginning of it comes from like the merchant mind first, right? And recognizing the early signs that this is going to be a thing. And I think if we go back to that time when I was there in 2017, 2018, and if you think of Aritzia before that, it was a parkas business. Remember those parkas with the
Oh, I had one. That's how I got through a winter in Toronto.
Did they have the coyote problem that we had?
Oh, God.
Do you remember that at Kidneys?
No. Oh, the fur?
The fur. I can't remember if it was real fur or not. Anyway,
mine was fake fur, for sure.
Okay, good. So it was a parkas business. That's what it was, right? And that was a trend. And that was when the business also was predominantly happening in Canada or colder climates. Like I think some of them in their first stores are like, Seattle, Chicago, New York, obviously. And it was like, oh, that's not in trend anymore, and things are changing. And what we were seeing, I believe, was sell through in the Super Puff. It existed in a very small way, and a high retention of customers because of it. They loved it. It's a great jacket.
Yeah.
We were really selling it, I think, probably early on, thinking about all the amazing product features and how technical it was and blah, blah, blah. And sort of the brief that we wrote going into 2018 was like, how do we position this as like an iconic fashion moment? This is an item that every girl needs to have. And that's was the beginning of the Super Puff campaign and what became internally known as Super Puff season. And Super Puff season is as big of an execution as a holiday. Like it's a really big deal. We always used to make jokes about like, who's going to get pregnant before Super Puff season. So don't need to be here because it's such a huge project with, so like very measurable revenue results against it. And that's what was super unique about that. And now I look back into 2025 and it's like, it was in my email this morning and not from Aritzia. Like maybe I was reading the Skim and she talks about, I got my Super Puff 10 years ago, but how does it really hold? And she does all this product consumer testing. I'm like, this is still very much a thing. And like, I'm a mom now, so I refer to my life before kids and after kids. So my Super Puff life was before kids, but like everybody and their dog has a Super Puff at school drop. Still.
And it's still the feature in the Aritzia window, like the giant, huge size Super Puff.
And this is the thing that Aritzia does well. It's like when it's working, lean in, own it, and don't be afraid of owning that. And that's not to say there couldn't be like internal struggles right now. Like, oh my God, what are we going to do when the Super Puff starts falling off? And when it's like your dog walker wearing it, it's like, yeah, it's coming.
Yeah,
it's not.
I sold mine this season on Poshmark.
Anything Aritzia sells on Poshmark really fast. I'm impressed. But there'll be a moment where it's not Super Puff season anymore, and it'll have to be something else. And I think that's what Aritzia's always been good at is identifying a trend, but also like leaning in and really servicing her for that trend. Like if you want a puffer jacket, there's nowhere else you don't even need to go anywhere else. Unless you want a weird niche or more expensive thing, like for the money and for the quality, and you want a red one, a yellow one, a shiny one, like it's
a leather one,
a waterproof one, a vegan leather one.
Yeah.
They have everything. You want a cropped one now, you want a long one you know what I mean? And
you want a lightweight one.
Yeah, exactly.
Ankle length one. Yeah.
And they're really good at owning sort of like, recognizing the opportunity and then like, leading the troops to it and being like, we need to own this. Mm-hmm. And we went to great lengths to, for example, own the words super puff. I think at one point we even trademarked super bouffant, which is French for super puff. And it was just like, I mean, it's a great name. It's a great product. It has tons of flexibility from a merchandising standpoint, and it's loud. It's recognizable. You just like it's kind of back to that thing of perfect timing for it.
Yeah. And
it was there. It wasn't like we invented it and then we're like, oh, we need to replace parkas. It was like, it was in the line. It was starting to sell. Puffers people were sort of making this transition to puffers. And it was like, we had the perfect thing to service them. And so it was like, how do we make sure as many people know about that as possible?
Yeah. So you were around maybe for the first big Super Puff campaign. Is that fair to say?
I think so. Yeah.
Can you tell me about that campaign? That was a real star-studded one, but a real unconventional one.
Yeah. So I was the year so there was a couple things that were happening. One of the sort of big mandates we had within our marketing strategy was always be where she is. And so if you think of 2017, it was like, she was always online, but it was like really gaining momentum, and influencers were starting to become a large part of people's marketing. That was like kind of the start of brands being completely built just on influencers. And that was sort of also the rise of the Kardashians in that moment, and how important sort of, and the value of those followings and those audiences that they captured. And I think also the start of the departure from only being in paid media. And so we were starting to dabble in influencers, as you do as Aritzia. We were definitely not innovating there, and maybe not something that we ever wanted to innovate in, because, I think you can also look at brands like, I don't know, Fashion Nova, for example, or Revolve. And it's like, they really innovated in influencers, and then they really it can't be the only thing. And so I think going into influencers, that was like, we knew very well to be diversified. And so the Super Puff was probably our first. I think Denim Forum came right after, but had a similar playbook. But we really wanted to use influencers as talent, and we had zero production budget, so they had to produce the assets. And looking back on that, I don't think I understood how scary that was going to be until we were actually in it, because it's very, very high stakes. And even though Aritzia is a massive brand, the diligence in budget management is like nowhere I have ever been.
You're not going a penny over.
No.
And if you're spending your production budget on the talent, then the talent is doing the producing.
Yes. And you're still spending it was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of money for Aritzia. And not to say if you went to another big brand, it would probably just be like, oh, that's like just the regular walk in the park, seasonal park for us. But like at Aritzia, it had a big budget put behind it, but it also was a huge opportunity. So we took our entire budget and put it towards talent. And I think, the lead talent that we launched with was Kendall Jenner, and she was going to be the red Super Puff. So like deciding which influencer was going to be which, like this very, very thoughtful.
I wouldn't picture her in anything else. Only the red.
We were like toying with the gold at one point, because she would have looked really good in that. But the truth is like the red was also very accessible, and we knew we were going to sell a lot of red. We also knew we had a great inventory position on red. And as most things at Aritzia, we worked very close to calendar. So like buys were placed, you knew what you were getting, and then they were able to chase inventory positions as things started to work. So we kind of like laid our stake in the ground against the red for her. And then we brought on another collection of influencers, anybody from mostly like sort of macro mega level down to maybe we had like 100,000 follower plays that were just, like really cool and relevant girls that were from like influencing the right people. But I always look back at that moment. And one of the things I pulled forward is like, how do you influence influencers? Because if you just work with thousands of micro influencers, like you never really, and it's back to that example from Native Shoes. It's like, we worked with Marc Jacobs first. So then we could work with anybody. We worked with Kendall Jenner first. So then everybody was like, yes. Yes, and more susceptible to being able to negotiate their rates as well, because it was something they wanted to be part of. And so the brief had been exactly that, like come up with a campaign that puts us where she is. We decided she was in social media. She was consuming this content of influencers and other girls that influenced her in her life, and who were the people that were influencing those influencers. And so the creative treatment was this. The original concept was like these 70s trading cards, and each trading card kind of had its own art package that corresponded to the color of the super puff that she would wear. And there were certain elements of those trading cards that were shared across each girl. But what it essentially meant is that we got the shots back, which in some cases was like 3 or 4 photos, maybe 8. I can't remember exactly how we negotiated it. And then we had to create those into campaign assets. And so we had these packages with a centralized sort of creative direction that we used to sort of be able to scale it to, because like it needed to be the web assets, it needed to be the email assets. They needed to be able to go on social. They needed to go on her channels and our channels. And as you know, creators like also have their own sense of how they want their to show up, and when they post ads, hashtag ads, how they want that to be perceived with their followers. So that was a very interesting dance, especially as you're working with multiple different personalities and people with different visions for themselves, and very different, like they all kind of laddered up to the same girl, but at the same time had different visions for themselves and what they were comfortable doing. And then also what you were going to get back from them was always a bit of a crapshoot.
I love that you shared the brief, which is be where she is, because suddenly that makes sense why a brand that is as image conscious and controlled on the brand side as Aritzia would take a risk, like handing the reins over to influencers to do UGC. And this was 2017. Like this was 3 years before everyone was forced to do this because of the pandemic. Like, you know, we all had to do this, but you were doing it by choice.
Yeah.
And even though you were truly answering the brief of being where she is, I'm imagining it was really hard to get buy-in of handing over those creative reins. Like how did you get that buy-in?
I think the buy-in was there, but I don't think the understanding was totally there about how risky that was until we started getting back the photography. And it was like, why is she wearing those shoes? Oh my God, we hate those skinny glasses. Or, you know, there was just like things that you're like, oh, I didn't anticipate that she was going to style it like this. Or that those would be the shoes she chose to wear, or, you know, whatever it was. I mean, there was a couple we got back and we're just like, yeah, nailed it. Everybody will feel comfortable with this. But I think when you give it, when you give styling over to the creator, it's like they're going to style it how they would wear it. And whatever trend they're sort of leaning into at the moment. And sometimes those trends might be a little ahead of where Aritzia was in that very given moment, or maybe just seen as behind or, you know, not right. And so we had a very, like, over time, because we wrote the brief once, sent it out, got some stuff back. Kendall Jenner was not the first one to receive the brief, by the way. And as we were getting things back, we're like, oh, we need to add in, you know, this, that, the other. Opportunity, we always would ask for opportunities for reshoots. Some people will agree to that and some people will not. And we definitely had to utilize that, I think, on more than one occasion. Or we just had to, there were some things that we got back that we were like, we really actually believe in this. And try to convince somebody that it was the right decision to move forward.
There was, for Kendall, there was the iconic shoes that she wore that was unlike anything we'd seen.
Shoegate.
Tell us what happened.
Shoegate. Okay, so we got her photos back. She looks amazing in the product, but she's wearing these shoes and they're strange. They're like not something you've seen before. And the way that they cut across her foot is like, what's going on with those? They're like these little netted shoes, these heels. And I'm like, I think they're cool. What do you guys think? By the way, I don't decide what's cool. And, people are like, yeah, okay. But there was definitely a huge internal struggle about those shoes. There was weekend phone calls about those shoes. And it was like, what do you mean you just let her pick her shoes? Because that came back to me in the brief, right? The great story about those shoes is that they were, and as they should be, this is who you have paid, this is the caliber of talent you've paid to work with. They were pre-season Off-White, so they had not been out yet. And at the time, Off-White, and you think of like where streetwear was coming into luxury in that moment, like they were the leader in that. They were the very beginning of sort of mainstreaming streetwear. And so as a result of her being in the shoes, Off-White reposts the picture.
And you, like, that photo could have gotten killed. Like, you guys almost killed that because of the shoes.
I mean, we spent a lot of time cropping the shoes, thinking, are we going to ask for a reshoot? Can we Photoshop the shoes? But, like, ultimately, as soon as that happened and we realized what they were, we were like, oh, this is fine. This is totally going to be fine. And there definitely was there were some great comments about the shoes from trollers and stuff. I think there was even virality around the shoes. Like, they're just some strange shoes. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the credibility of, being aligned with that designer and that talent who only had access to those shoes because of who she was, because you couldn't buy them in the store, was probably one of the really big wins of that campaign. I haven't seen Aritzia be reposted by a brand like that since, I don't think.
True street credibility.
Yeah. And that comes back to like what I said around patience and timing. Like that was just the right time to be in those shoes, because if you're in Off-White shoes today, 2025, I don't know if we really care, But at that moment in time, it really mattered, and it mattered to the customer. And it was like just a little bit ahead of her, which is, again, keeping her inspired.
How many different celebrities or influencers or creators, whatever we decide to call them, did you have for that campaign?
I think I had like 8 to 10, maybe.
So that's a lot. And you're getting all of these different assets shot in different light, different locations. Mm-hmm. How did you then
different levels of retouching? People just went rogue on their own retouching. And they're like, no, I didn't. Photos. And you're like, no, you did. Like, we are a group of professionals over here, and you did.
That's wild. Well, how do you create consistency that makes it feel like one cohesive campaign when you're getting assets from that many different places?
Yeah. I mean, the only way we could do that was graphic treatment and copy. And that came back to the campaign package. And, one of the really cool things that was part of that campaign package was, which was another internal struggle to get past, were Giphies. And so they were these animated stickers, and those stickers existed on all of the assets, even in still versions. And then girls could then use those stickers and repost them on their own content, for example. And we, like, looking back on that, it was like Giphies were totally new, right? Like, being able to use Giphies in your Instagram stories and posts, like, was new. And so when I look back on that, like, and even like what we had to go through to get a Giphy account approved, because we didn't have one, or to get our stickers approved, or to make sure they were out there, or they were showing up with the right tags. Like, all that stuff was really crazy. Like, and going back to that feeling of impossible. And it really just came from like, this was sort of the creative intent behind them and just figuring it out. And so those, I think at that season, those Giphies were used like over 2 million times.
Wow.
They were huge. And they were like, some of them were really kind of out there and funny. We had a local illustrator from Vancouver do them. And there was like one that was a sticker that would go on the back of your car that said honk if you puff. Like it was not, I found them when I was looking. Oh, and we did the skinny glasses with Super Puff going through them because there was skinny glasses gate. And
so there's another controversy over skinny
warm.
Glasses showing up.
Yeah. World's Greatest Puff, which is like in a mug. We had race cars, we had air fresheners, and they all sort of were wrapped around this idea. We had a lucky rabbit's foot they were all wrapped around this idea of this like creative sort of 70s trading card vision. And so that's an interesting campaign because there was these little wins in there that you couldn't have anticipated. And some of them were really intentional, but some of them were successful beyond, I think, what we had even thought they would be, like the shoes, like the Giphies. And another thing that we did that, again, was completely intentional is that we started reaching out to some of the fashion meme accounts. And we said, we want you to create a meme for us. So it was like an amplification strategy. And those accounts were It's May's Memes, which is at the time she was making like pictures of celebrities and then making their jackets or their tops like extra supersized. She was like a young, like teenage girl who lived in Hawaii when I got a hold of her. I was like, this is amazing. And then there was another account called Situations that did like fashion, like girls, like women on the runway, and then would put them in position or put them in sort of backgrounds that were Photoshopped that were completely like, what is she, is that really what she's doing? And so for ours, it was Kendall Jenner and she was bending down, but she was on a surfboard catching a wave. And so there was just like little, again, back to the details and why those matter. It was like these little extra amplification things that we did that people thought were completely organic that just helped contribute to it being a cultural moment for that product and for the brand. And I think if you look back, like that was the start of, you know, a very, very, very successful franchise for the Aritzia business that's noted often and frequently in their earnings calls as, you know, sort of a key reason for their success. And it was really fun to work on.
Did you, I mean, just hearing about all those auxiliary things you did, the memes, were you throwing money against those extra initiatives or was that just like,
yeah.
What,
not a lot.
Do you know what,
not a lot, still way cheaper than paid advertising. And it was like, it's sort of, that you treat them like an influencer almost, right? But it was just the idea. And again, in 2017, 2018, that the whole meme culture was just starting. And there were certain thought leaders in that space. And some of those partnerships just made total sense. Like we had a supersized puffer jacket and we partnered with the girl who took celebrities and photoshopped them to look like they had supersized clothes on. Like it was, some of them were just really natural. And then some of them were just like, okay, well, we want to be, you know, if it's going to be a fashion item, move it away from just being this technical product. Situations was a great one. And it was like, they were posting off the runways of Balenciaga or whatever, and then the Super Puff. And so I think it's like sort of going back to being the company you want to keep and how you want your consumers to perceive you. And it was the same thing for me at Native Shoes. It's like, I don't want to be cool Crocs. I want to be like a fashion brand. And if your company at that time was Marc Jacobs, then it was instant credibility in that space and just completely shifted the conversation. We didn't sell very many of those boots, but it completely created so much talk value for us as a brand in particular that, you know, it was worth it. Yeah.
Aritzia pretty famously doesn't work with a lot of agencies. Did that whole concept come from your team in-house?
Yeah.
Do you remember how much you spent on it?
If you Google how much did Kendall Jenner get paid for the Super Puff or for the Aritzia post or the Super Puff campaign or something like that, what they claim she got paid for one post was our entire budget. So
okay, great.
I can confirm she did not get paid exactly that, but she did not take the entire budget. But I mean, there were, like I said, there was the meme things that we did that were incremental. We used an outside illustrator who was just friends with all of our designers. I think he owns Pizza Coming Soon, Rack.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not like he was breaking the bank or anything. And going back to like how Aritzia values their employees is like, we had best in class talent.
Yeah.
And when you work at Aritzia and you are a contributor and you're valued, it's like they hold on to you too.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, one of my co-founders of Monday is former Aritzia talent. They hire the best
to keep you there.
Absolutely.
And it was one of the things I look back on in that team is like one of the strongest teams I've ever worked on. People really cared what they were doing. They were really proud of what they were working on. Awesome creative leadership and like valued. Like when creative is valued by a brand, people do good work. When it is not, it's so obvious.
So there is probably a large group of people that know Super Puff as a brand even more than they know Aritzia. And Aritzia has created all of these just incredible franchises.
Yep.
Some that we talked about, Denim Forum, TNA, Sunday Best, and obviously Super Puff. Are there risks when you have a franchise that almost becomes bigger than the brand? And maybe can you give some context for how that franchise model even works at Aritzia?
Yeah, I'll try. I mean, it seems to ever evolve. When I was there, and I was there for 2 years, we moved to Belgium. So that's when I left. I think we had 16 in-house brands.
Wild.
And there was lots of talk of consolidating, and like a brand like a Babaton or a Wilfred also had diffusions of other brands within it. TNA did too. And so those would also count as brands. And it was like, I don't know if I have a really straight answer for you, because the truth is it worked. And we would look at it and think like, oh, we're not building the Aritzia brand. We're only building the TNA brand, or we're only building the Babaton brand. But I don't know if any of that was really true. And I think because you were the sole destination of it, you had them in your store, or you had them on your website, or you had them on your social. They were still interacting with what would be the Aritzia brand and the Aritzia experience. And no matter what happens with the brands or the trends or the products at the time, it's like there's always something that's having a moment, right? Because it's diversified enough. Yeah. And the experience of Aritzia stays consistent, and it's something that's thoughtful. It's something that's premium. It's something that should be enjoyable. And it's something that they value building for the customer, is thinking through those details. And so if I look back on I don't know if I agree that Super Puff became bigger than Aritzia. I think Super Puff contributed to the success of Aritzia and allowed it to then own, I don't know, Sweat Fleece, for example, seems to be something that they're really big in now. Mm-hmm. But it comes back to meeting her where she is and knowing what she values in that time and what the trend is and what she wants to wear, and delivering that on trend, on quality, at a reasonable price. It was great value for what you were getting. And I think that's the thing that no matter what you buy from Aritzia, is the experience you'll consistently have. Mm-hmm. So if you come to Aritzia for the puffer, because that's the must-have item of the season, and I guess we can speculate what's next, then do you trust that Aritzia can deliver it again?
Yeah.
Because there has to be another one. It was the parka before. I don't know what it was before that. I don't. But there was different things. There was different franchises within Aritzia, even when I was there, pants. Women were obsessed with this one pant. I think it was called the Effortless pant or something like that.
Kind of crepey pants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That
almost
pant.
like There was like a jogger version.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just
They
like
had those
we just
cardigans.
yeah, make it. Oh yeah. Or the slip dresses, the
Yeah.
Wilford slip dress. Just make it in every color.
Yeah. And it means like when something goes out of style, Aritzia, the brand, doesn't go out of style.
Exactly.
You just maybe sunset a franchise.
Exactly. Exactly. And I mean, they're starting to do more, and it's hard to say, like, are they building the brands, but they're building these collections under the Aritzia banner for the first time. Mm-hmm. But it's never, they're not risky items. It's like sweat fleece and, things that you always are going to want, I think. I think you're always going to want a sweatshirt.
I think so. I've been going to TNA
It might not be
years.
the thing you wear to high school.
Yeah.
There might be a moment in time, but certainly you are right now.
Yeah. Okay, transitioning a little bit. Let's talk about SAXX. You've been there for almost 5 years now. Big change. Aritzia, all women. SAXX, all about dudes. What learnings do you think you brought over from that campaign specifically, or from your time at previous brands to your role at SAXX?
The reason I left Aritzia is because we had the opportunity to move to Belgium. I have nothing but amazing stories from that place.
And you were doing 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, like flying in and out
eventually
for a while?
Eventually. Jeez. So my husband got a job in Antwerp, and because I was forced to write my vision boards while we were at Kit and Ace, we were going to live in Europe. And I was like, oh my God, I just thought that was a pipe dream that was never going to happen. And so when the opportunity first came up, we really leaned into it, and it happened. So when I went to Aritzia and was like, I'm moving to Belgium, they were like, oh, would you consider I was like, I don't really have a timeline. I can manage a transition until we find a replacement, whatever you want. And so we started looking, and then the date was coming. And they were like, would you consider coming back and forth?
Wow.
Just while we do transition. And I literally had no plan. So I was like, yes. And I liked work. I liked work. And I was proud of the work we were doing. So what I would do is I would fly to Antwerp for 2 weeks and not work. I mean, I'll work a little bit, not really. And then I would fly home and come into the office for 2 weeks. And just go back and forth. And this is, again, life before kids. So I was no problem doing that. And that went on. And the other thing that happened during that time is that I fell pregnant.
My favorite expression.
So my plan was we were moving to Europe. We were going to summer in Italy. It's going to be fabulous. And I was like, wah, wah. And I actually found out I was pregnant probably a week after I'd quit my job, packed up my entire townhouse. Everything we owned was in the middle of the Atlantic. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm pregnant. It was the furthest thing from my mind. I was almost 10 weeks pregnant. I'd been on a juice cleanse. I'd been working out every day. I was like, why do I still feel like shit? So I basically went back and forth until I just couldn't fly anymore. So I had all the compression socks and the comfy pants and all of that kind of stuff. But it was good. And I mean, it's how I got to see through the end of sort of that Super Puff season, the Denim Forum. We did the holiday campaign, and on board the woman that ultimately came in and backfilled me. And then I got to the point where I was like, I should not be getting on a plane anymore, especially for that long, because there's no direct flights to Brussels, by the way. You have to fly to either Montreal or Frankfurt. So it's just it's a long haul. I was very good at it, but it's just an extra mention. To do it while you're pregnant was tough. And so I ended up staying on part-time and helping them with recruiting for the creative team. And that was literally till the day my son was born. So this is all to say, now I live in Europe. I have a newborn. Everybody talks about crazy mat leaves in Europe. Well, that's everywhere except for Belgium. Mm-hmm. In Belgium, women go back to work at 4 months. And what that meant for me is just that there were a lot of programs and systems in place to support women that wanted to go back to work.
Wow.
So I ended up going back just doing consulting part-time, not for Aritzia. I worked with some other smaller brands. I went to the gym, and my son went to daycare 2 or 3 days a week. And when it became apparent that we were not going to be staying forever, we had made the decision to come back to Vancouver. And it just so happened that, and I was coming back to Vancouver, I was born at Aritzia. And this is to get to the SAXX story, but it just so happened we arrived in Vancouver 2 days before they shut the border because COVID. I was in Venice, Italy, 5 days before they shut that city, letting strangers hold my baby.
I was at the starting line of a race with 5,000 people in Texas.
You're like,
days before.
Is this
elbow to elbow?
Yeah, like
breathing all over each other.
The good old days, right?
Yeah.
I remember landing in Frankfurt and it was just me and my son. He's like 8 months old. And there was people in hazmat suits in the airport. And I was like, what's happening? What is happening? Anyways, so we get home. I'm going back to Aritzia, but I want to finish my full year mat leave. We were just going to spend a month in Hawaii. We had rented a house in LA. I'd called it turbo mat leave. We went to Russia. We went traveling everywhere. And when it became really obvious that that was not happening, I was like, oh, you know what? Maybe I will come back earlier. And they were like, no, we're good. July's good. We're good. Because all the stores are closed. Nobody knows what's happening. And Wendy Bennison, who had been the president at Kidneys, called me and she was like, I have this VP brand role open. Would you be interested? And I was like, never. I'm never, ever doing men's underwear. And she's a very convincing lady. There's sales definitely in that background of hers. And she's like, I think that you would really, really love this team. I think it would be really interesting for you as you sort of think of your next phase of your life, your phase as a mother. And then she goes, the entire executive team, except for one, maybe two, is all women. Wow. And I was like, interesting, at a men's underwear brand. So that was really the hook for me. And I said, well, if you think they're so great, would you consider letting me meet some of them? And I remember she hesitated a little bit and then she said, okay. And I had calls with the chief product officer, the creative director for product, and I think it was the VP of e-com at the time. And I was just like, I'm actually really excited about this. Yeah. They had a really clear plan that they had just started to go to market to sell the business when COVID hit and decided, okay, let's back out of that and wait. And they're like, we're going in a year. And and I'd never been part of something like that, at least successfully. Yeah. So I decided I was going to go to SAXX, the men's underwear company from the women's fashion brand. And it was a interesting decision, but when I looked back on sort of the reasons I wanted to do it was I wanted to have the experience of taking something to market. I wanted to have the experience where I couldn't rely on my own gut instincts anymore because I was not the customer. So, how were you going to bring in the voice of the customer and research and insights? And I was really inspired by the team that was there. And so that sort of set me on the path of going to men's underwear. And we sold SAXX in the first 14 months I was there, 2 weeks before my daughter was born.
It got acquired.
We got acquired, yeah.
Unbelievable.
And so, and it had been owned by the same private equity group, I think, for over 10 years. So it was a great time to be selling your business because everybody was getting totally pumped up by the growth of COVID. And men's underwear fared very well during COVID, especially premium underwear, because people were sitting at home looking for sort of those everyday luxuries. And a $30 pair of underwear definitely delivered that. It made you feel good. You're treating yourself.
But it was still an easy purchase.
Totally.
You don't have to think about it.
Totally. And so, it was an awesome ride there. So we sell. We do a full, we did a very early on, at least a visual repositioning of the brand because it was not where it needed to be at that time. I was able to build that team from scratch. I think I hired all but 2 of the people on that team. It was about 20. And was able to recruit some really great talent for just that very reason. People want to work with good people. We had in-house creative, we had resource, and we had an equal part D2C and wholesale business. And so when I was there, I mean, yeah, it was almost 5 years. We did repositioning into like really owning our product and our technology. It was a business that was born from wholesale. So like things like that didn't matter 10 years ago, all of a sudden did. Like what you named your product mattered in a D2C environment. Mm-hmm. Like an example would be, we had a pair of underwear in the line. It was called the Undercover. And I had the insight that 95% of men's underwear purchases contain cotton. That was our only cotton pair. And we didn't even tell people that. So we did like a quick A/B test online where we changed the name Undercover to Undercover Cotton. Mm-hmm. And sales jumped like 50%. Like just in like those couple weeks, you know? And so we ended up rebranding it Drop Temp Cooling Cotton, because it turned out the Hohenstein lab in Germany also said it meant it reached certain thresholds of being like some of the most cooling fabric against technical brands. And so we were like, the insight again was cotton, but the reason they don't like it is they think it's bunchy, it bags out, and it's too hot. And I was like, well, this isn't that. It just has like stretch in it and has modal and it has, you know,
cooling cotton
stuff. So we called it Drop Temp Cooling Cotton, and it went from being like a laggard product in the line to the number 3 selling style of underwear.
Wow.
Just
naming franchises.
Just like those cute little things that you can glean in insights and how the customer responds to them. Like it would have been really interesting discovering those in my time at SAXX. Mm-hmm. And also working with men is different, but interesting insight into men's underwear. 50% of the customers are still women. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't do that at my house. I still don't think I do that at my house. We'll see. But there is a huge, huge part of the population that does. And maybe sometimes it's just because like literally men will wear their underwear to there's holes in them. Like there's the top 3 factors in a trigger to buy underwear is number 1, it's on sale. That's how they think about it. It's on sale. Yep. Number 2 is my old pair has holes in it.
Pair singular.
Yeah. It has a hole. And number 3 is it makes me feel good. Mm. And so we really wanted to focus on making him feel good, making him feel more confident. And we really like started in the last year, like really pulling into how that related to the athlete and how that related to performance. Because one of the big differentiators at SAXX is that we had everyday underwear, but we also had a category that was just performance underwear, just for people and their athletic pursuits. And, you know, different brands have that. It's like, this is the mesh material or whatever, but nobody really owned it as a performance category in underwear. Mm-hmm. And so we rebranded our performance category as SAXX Pro and launched it alongside some really great athlete partnerships with NFL players. And most recently, just yesterday, Aaron Gordon from the Denver Nuggets is the latest partnership to come out under the influencer program that I had set up there called the SAXX Game Changers.
Love that. Yeah. So that I mean, there's a real thread of the partnerships that you created at each of the brands that you've worked with. Like there were always, exactly like you said, the Marc Jacobs. You set the benchmark, and then others want to follow because you've started with the right partnerships. And it sounds like you brought that model into SAXX as well. Yeah. I want to know, how does one do UGC in the underwear space?
You kind of don't. And I'll tell you from learning that it just doesn't really work. If you work with creators, it can work. But it's a certain style and it's a certain look and it's a certain thing that happens. Like when I first started, had all sorts of guidelines when we were trying to work with influencers, and it just was like, it was barely working. Like probably the thing that worked the best is a woman like holding up the pair of underwear inside out and just talking into the camera about it, to be honest. But that's a very certain style of content, right? Yeah. You're building brand in men's underwear. I'm not sure that works. I'm just going to say I'm not convinced that works. And we did because we worked with different levels of athletes. We worked with a lot of collegiate players as well. And we would have them, you know, just use your iPhone. Here's the lighting, oh my God, some of the stuff that we'd get back, like we had a retired NFL player and the stuff he sent back was like, make sure there's no background noise. He had the television on. He was standing in front of the window. Like everything you don't do, he was doing. And so we learned really early
Imagine being his girlfriend. The photos you'd get.
A wife, children, like this guy is very successful and like beyond. But, he's not a content creator. And you run into that, I think, with athletes quite a bit. And so I learned very early on, like carve out the couple $1,000s in travel money that it's going to take to send our photographer and one brand rep and rent some equipment and just do it that way. And so if you look back, like very recent example of that is the partnership that we did with Ashton Genty. He was up for the Heisman Trophy in December, and we called him the SAXX Theismann winner. And the team flew, like two of them flew into Idaho on a Thanksgiving Sunday, and they had an hour of his time and rented an Airbnb with a white wall, and you just shoot it yourself.
Yeah.
And, I would say he's an example of like excellent talent when it comes to athletes, very personable, knows how to sell product, looks into the camera, like very charming. But like, there's no way on top of that, we could have expected him to just produce content that we wanted to put a seal, like say, oh, this is our campaign asset. Oh, this is going to be for our out of home wild postings that we're doing in New York over the holiday. Like, no, never.
No idea. They have no idea what you're doing.
And I think that scrappy form of producing content in some cases is totally acceptable, but like come up with the $5,000 to have your in-house team just do it. And so that it's something that you can use and have just a little bit of control over. And I think that's the difference of working with, the female creator pool is much deeper than the male one. And then when it comes to athletes on top of that, and I just come up with the money. Otherwise don't do it. It's not worth it. It's just it really is worth the value of just investing a little bit of production dollars.
Okay. So maybe professional athletes and male athletes in particular aside, it seems like everyone today is a content creator. Mm-hmm. And you kind of said that pool is really deep. And it seems like every brand is making creator content the centerpiece of their ads and their campaigns. It's just ubiquitous. Mm-hmm. So, Aritzia was probably a pioneer of it, but now it's everywhere. It's someone talking to the screen. It's creators creating the content for the brands. What do you think? Do you see this trend continuing? Does this still work? It seems like it's still working, but I just wonder, is there a ceiling on this? What are your thoughts?
So I think it's working really well in this moment of time for certain results. And I think for conversion results in a micro audience, it works well. I don't think, and this is maybe, no, I don't think it builds brands. I think that there is such a volume of it in market right now. It's losing credibility very quickly. But I think there's a way to balance it right. And it comes back to what I said at the beginning about the influencer who influences the influencers. Mm-hmm. And I think a brand that does that really well in this moment in time would be a brand like AG1 or AG Greens. Yeah. And you think they work with, some of the biggest athletes, names, celebrities in the world. And then the everyday mom influencer, I don't know if you're getting served this one, is staring at the camera. It's like, I'm so busy. All I have time is shaking up her AG Greens.
I'm not the target market. I'm the health target market. I'm not the busy mom.
You get the running one or something?
Yeah.
I think they do it really well. Mm. I'll give you another example of where they show up. This is a weird COVID story, but we got really into this sailing show over COVID called Delos. And it is literally this guy who used to own a tech company, sold it, bought a sailboat, started sailing the world 15 years ago or something. And he started making a YouTube show about it. And since then he met a girl, they got married, they have a daughter, and it's just them sort of documenting their life. So they're crossing the Pacific Ocean is sort of like a regular day for them. they plug AG greens all the time. And I'll tell you, me and Mike got right on that. But again, it's like, it's in that situation where you're like, if it's good enough for the people that are lost at sea for 37 days, then it's good enough for me.
You were influenced.
But you know, it's sort of like offset by Lewis Hamilton drinks it. So if he's drinking it, then, and this family that's living on the ocean is drinking it, like they haven't seen fresh vegetables in months.
Yeah, but they're not getting scurvy.
Exactly.
Because they've got their AG1.
So I think there's ways to do it right. But I think there's still the desire for produced, elevated content. And I think it still matters. I was thinking about this as you know, like AI is becoming a big conversation, and like the CEO is just like, well, why do we need copywriters? Or, you know, why don't we just use generative AI for the campaign or whatever? And I was like, the very essence of creativity will be gone. Like if you just let a computer come up with things that it's already come up with, and different iterations of that. And I think that's, you know, the thing that you can get into with over testing creative assets and over optimizing is everybody moving to this place where they all look the same, which is palatable for a mass audience in a moment in time, but it's not the thing that continues to elevate. And I think to continue to elevate, and I think to find growth, you have to also factor in taking risks.
Yeah.
And really only a true human creative mind at this point can come up with those ideas.
And that's where those cultural moments come from.
Totally.
You know, AI is not coming up with Rex illustrations of Super Puffs.
No. And who would have ever come up with honk if you puff?
Yeah.
I don't know how we got that.
It's a lot of it is gut and just knowing what's going to resonate with culture. You have to know culture, but you also have to be game to try to make new culture.
Yeah.
And that's not coming from AI. That's coming from humans.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. As you're looking around, seeing what's out in the world, you are someone that has always had a finger on the pulse of what's happening in the world of marketing. Who are you looking up to brand-wise, marketing-wise? Who's doing an amazing job in the space these days?
Well, I said AG Greens, but like really in this moment in time, and especially the last couple of weeks, like, can we hear it for On Running? I am loving them right now. I love that they are just unexpected and still sort of living in this really credible world of premium performance. They're like worn by, you know, dog walking moms to top performing athletes. I thought bringing like Elmo, for example, into their campaign with Roger Federer during Super Bowl, and the way that they teased that and the way that they brought it into like some of their other experiences and events and content that they were creating was really smart. It reminded me of something we did when I was at Native Shoes. We worked with Fraggle Rock. we speaking of ideas that you're like, that's never happening. We got a hold of the Jim Henson studio, and we had Traveling Matt, who was a little explorer, and what was her name? Who's the red? Maybe her name is Red Fraggle. Anyways,
I couldn't remember.
Cut this part out. Maybe it's like self-fulfilling prophecy. Elmo On Running. And then this morning they had some really great, like they're relaunching they're called, I don't even know what it's called. Their Cloudburst or something. I saw it this morning. Cloud Surfer 2. And they've come out with this really cool artistic, like weird content that really just exaggerates what this product and technology does. It's like somebody's stepping on balloons. It's like a Jello shoe mold shaking around, and like, you know, things like that I'm like, it's super creative. It's out there. It doesn't look like anybody else is doing stuff like that. Absolutely they are, but they're like small niche unknown fashion brands for sure. They've come on. But for a big brand to be acting like that and taking risks like that, I think is really inspiring and speaks to like, I mean, they're huge. They're eating Nike's lunch. We all love that right now. Let's be clear though, Nike still has a lot of lunch. And I think that they're taking really clever risks in a moment in time where brands are getting a lot same, or have become too reliant on, testing results and what was the ROAS and all of that kind of stuff. Like this stuff is, a lot of people are not going to understand, but the people that do are thought leaders and trendsetters. And I think that they speak really, really well to every sort of stage of the life cycle when it comes to their brands, Yeah. Like I said, it doesn't bother me that, there's like, when you get on an airplane, everybody and their dog is wearing On running shoes, and everybody travels.
Especially in business class, they're all wearing On.
Oh yeah. And it's also not like a very accessible price point, right? Like you need to be making an investment. And I just think it's really inspiring what they're doing and the risks that they're taking and sort of their sense of humor, but being able to really preserve sort of being an icon in the athletic performance space as well. I think another brand that's doing it really well on a smaller scale would be somebody like Jacquemus, right? Like they just keep putting out great stuff. That's super inspiring. It has really nothing to do with their product a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm. That's brand building.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that in this day and time when everything has become so measurable, that has been a place where brands are starting to stand out. And it's the people that have the patience to wait for the results that I think are going to win long term.
Awesome. That's great. Okay. Last question before we wrap up. The one that I always love to finish with is, what's the best piece of brand or marketing advice you've ever been given?
I think the one thing would be like, and this comes back to the idea of measurability and everybody being obsessed with metrics right now, is like, yes, KPIs are important and definitely have them as part of accountability. But like, what are the big outcomes? And how do you attach your campaigns to like what the strategies, like the growth strategies of the business are? And I think, Aritzia was a great example of that. Like, I can tell you, like the year of that campaign, the Super Puff sold out. The red Super Puff specifically was gone. It sold out twice. It quadrupled over what it had done the previous year. Wow. But the long-term impact of what the Super Puff franchise came to be, how much money we spent that season for us even, was like, it's a drop in the bucket, really. And nothing will be tied back to, there's no straight line that says it was that moment, right? And it's never the collection of one thing. It was the right product, the right time, the right store experience, the right merchandising, the right colors, whatever. But like the outcome is there. And I think people in this day and age get so focused in on what the short-term measurements are, especially when you're able to do attribution and stuff like that. There's a lot of things that are broken with that model, right? But you still need to be able to sell it in. You still need to be able to get your budget. You still need to be able to show what the buyback is. And I think people need to get back to a place where they're long-term in their thinking around growing their business, growing their brand. And like KPIs matter, but it's not the engagement on the post that ultimately delivered the outcome, right? It's a contributing factor of success. And in that moment, I can tell you, like hundreds of thousands of people landed on the page, but none of them bought. None of them. It wasn't the one, that it was featured in Vogue magazine after as like, Kendall Jenner, blah, blah, blah. Or that Us Weekly covered it and said that, she got paid $1 million for it. Like there wasn't, by the way, not true. And everybody thought we were so crazy for that. I was like, that's not even true. But the thing is like the bigger outcome is like, we're standing here like 8 years later talking about it, Yeah. And that was the very beginning of it. And I think people need to get into thinking about what the long-term results are and, what are the things over time that get you there? And how are we all sort of walking to the beat of the same drum? And like Super Puff, for example, is a great example. Like everybody in the business was aligned around making that program successful. So it got the investment, it got the time, it got the product, it got the floor space, it got the educating the store staff. Like it got everything that it needed to be successful. And I think sometimes people want to wait and see. And there was a wait and see moment for sure with the Super Puff where it wasn't getting all that attention. And it's like when you start seeing indicators of success, it's time to go.
Yeah.
And so I guess my advice would be like KPIs are important, but what are the outcomes? Like what are really the big outcomes? Like what are those things that seem impossible? And you're never going to be able to equate just sort of one thing or attribute one thing to contributing to it that you want for your business and for your brand.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Shawna, I learned a ton in the last hour and a half. I appreciate your time so much. Where can people find you online?
Probably LinkedIn, right? / Shawna Olsten.
Perfect.
I'm smart enough in the day to go grab that. I'm the only one out there, so.
Yep.
There might be some other Amanda Smiths. I don't know.
There's a few of us. A lot of us.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Take care.